Being a parent can be really challenging. It's normal to feel uncertain about whether you're doing the right things to raise healthy and happy children. That's why Child and Family Resource Network focuses on connecting pregnant parents and those with kids under the age of 5 with free support services to help them build confidence in their parenting journey. Everyone deserves to have someone they can turn to for support with parenting. Visit childandfamilyresourcenetwork.org today.
Welcome to the Advanced Sports Analytics Show here on RotoGrinders. My name is Jordan Cooper, a.k.a. Blender Ed, Blender HD, hopefully on top of you in the GPPs this coming Sunday. It wasn't this past Sunday. Join with me is one of the proprietors of Advanced Sports Analytics, the man behind the spreadsheets and the models and the math stuff. It's Stuart Gibson, and you came out with an article. It was a free one on Advanced Sports Analytics that kind of analyzed last week's slate with some of the stuff that we were talking about, where in GPPs we're trying to compare the likelihood of a shootout in a game with the stack price, like the point per dollar for the stack compared to the ownership. And while we kind of had a little debate where obviously we want to highlight and attack the high total games more likely to shoot out, but that's also tends to be where the ownership goes, and it also tends to be where more expensive players go. But for the week one slate, like in the Millie Maker on DK, you seem to find that some of the high total games were actually under-owned, and those middling games were actually over-owned.
Yeah, well, I mean, I thought last week with Brandon and you guys had a really interesting conversation. I think Brandon on the side of really wanting to chase these super high total games. And I think your approach of kind of trying to identify games in the middle that have that likelihood of possibly going high and, being okay with, hey, look, if the high game goes high and everyone's on it,
I lose. That's just it. I lose.
And that happens. But if, everyone's on the high game and it goes low and you're somewhere in the middle, you win. And I thought that was an interesting kind of discussion. And I know certainly in the show, I didn't really have a strong opinion one way or the other. I don't spend too much time chasing these massive, pool prizes. But I was just interested to kind of look back at the Millionaire Maker from last week and see kind of where the ownership went. And, I think just tying in some of our tools, and I think also kind of the way that you discuss things in terms of a range of outcomes. I think it's so easy to look at, Team A and be like, oh, well, they're the highest implied point total. They're going to be the highest scoring team. And, with the way that variance works and just that implied total is a median, just because you're the high implied, point total team, the actual odds of you still landing the high total on the slate really aren't that high. I mean, you're maybe the highest of the, 26 or maybe 24 teams to land that high total, but you're still a team of one going up against a field of 23. Odds are you're actually not going to land the high total. And I mean, we saw that with Green Bay. That was, or I guess we'll start with Baltimore. They were kind of the high implied team, and they quite nearly got there. But still, when you're trying to fend off 23 other teams, odds are, the high implied team isn't actually going to be the high scoring team. And when you factor in kind of variance, there's reasonable ways of kind of just calculating the odds of each team being the high scoring team. And that's not to say that, a tournament winning stack has to come from the high team, because, the way passing and running, team dynamics work. I think there were actually last week a pretty large pool of teams with high implied point totals that, you just kind of had a feeling like if they were going to get there, it wasn't going to be through a all-out aerial assault, which might lend itself towards a big stack, but really through just like dominating on the ground. But yeah, I went back, and you can go to the website to, I guess, read the article in full. But the general gist is kind of we plotted probability of teams being the high-scoring team on the slate versus the proportion of double stacks that were owned, that were associated with those teams.
And when you say double stacks, that would be a quarterback with two of their teammates.
Yes, two of their teammates. I was looking specifically at wide receivers or tight ends. I definitely know there are some, like, Eckler is a super viable as a running back, a part of a super viable Chargers stack. There's a number of other running backs around the league that are just really strong pass catchers, and could be a part of quote traditional double stack. But I was looking just at pass catchers and their quarterbacks, and I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, but like, to me, an efficient strategy of, if you were max entering 150 lineups, an efficient strategy might be to say, all right, let me look at the, this week we have 26 teams on the main slate. Let me see the probability of all those, if each of those teams being the top scoring team on the slate, scale that probability by price of stack, and just allocate your lineups towards those different stacks according to price scaled probability. Now, I'm interested to hear like why that could potentially be wrong. What are the pitfalls there? I mean, to me, I think one obvious one is that some teams that have efficient offenses have a ground oriented offense, so they don't really lend themselves to double stacking, or they have a super condensed target tree where there's really not necessarily room for more than one player to have an explosive game as a pass catcher, or they have a super, sparse target tree where it's kind of hard to pin down, two players that you like. But am I crazy here to think that this is like a one possible way to think about it, where say, how likely is each team to be the high team on the slate? Allocate my stacks accordingly.
That's essentially what we're looking for when we're stacking games. When you're either stacking one side of a game or the game itself, like you're playing a double stack, a 3-man quarterback, 2 pass catchers, and then a run back, or even 2 run backs in like a super type of stack, or 3-3 that some people do, which is extremely high variance. But it's very similar to what RotoGrinders has for MLB, called Slate IQ. And every day, Jamino comes out with, he runs a simulation of 25 comparable slates with the pricing and the types of players from Results DB, because we have all the DK information. And then, obviously, the chances of it being in the winning lineup. So it doesn't necessarily mean the highest score. So like a Coors game in baseball typically have high totals, but also the prices of those players tend to be bumped up because of it. Is it a slate that has high price pitching, that has high ceilings? Well, that leads itself to possibly having cheaper stacks having an increased probability of appearing in the winning lineup. So it's not, to me, it's not necessarily what's the high total game. It's what's the most likely high total stack. Because unlike RotoGrinders, which you could, there's a limited time offer, Core 4 subscription, if you want to get all the premium tools, lineup HQ, ownership projections. We have so much NFL content. It's ridiculous. Access to the Discord. I'm in Discord seemingly all day. So you can ask me anything you want. You join the NFL channel and mention me. I'll answer any question, pretty much any question you want, as long as it's not like, do I play this guy or that guy? It's like something based on DFS strategy. So you could go to rotogrinders.com/media/ASA, or click on the link in the description in the YouTube video, and your first month, $5 off the Core 4 subscription for NFL, MLB, NBA, PGA. You get it all. And also all the premium NFL shows. So this show is free. And I think it's one of the best free shows there is in the industry. A lot of people like it. But would you agree, Stuart, that, like, for instance, this week, I'm just using a for instance, we got, obviously the chalk is the highest total game is the Falcons and the Cowboys, 54 total. But we also have like the Chiefs. The Chiefs Chargers have that their totals come down to 47.5. But like a Chiefs stack, for instance, like the stack Mahomes, Hill, and Kelsey is very, very expensive. So like in order for that to be the highest scoring, the Chiefs could put up the highest points on the board. Let's say they have the highest point, they put up 38 points as a team. And the Falcons and Cowboys each put out 29 or something. Well, based on the prices, like the Cowboys stack probably, if it's 2 touchdowns to Cooper and 1 to Lamb and a Zeke receiving touchdown or something, Prescott's in the winning lineup. You got the Cowboy stack wins only because like Kelsey doesn't hit the 100-yard bonus. Hill has the 100-yard bonus and no touchdown because DeMarcus Robinson has one of the touchdowns. Like the Chiefs could put up the most amount of points and none of their players end up in the winning lineup. So to me, I don't necessarily just look at the range of outcomes of like the game. Like I look at what ways could the production in the game and the distribution of points, fantasy points in the game, how can it be skewed? So like, what's that? Like, what would be like that Venn diagram, like circles? So like, for instance, taking the Falcons Cowboys, like if I told you that the Cowboys were going to put up 32 to 35 points, you could find ways, because it's very easy to say, well, I think the Cowboys put up 14 points, so I'm fading the game. Like that makes it easy because if they score only 2 touchdowns, like that stack's dead. Like no one makes value. But there are instances in which the Cowboy stack scores 28 points, 35 points, and let's say it's spread out. So if it's spread out and if it's spread out to the expensive guys, they put up good scores, but not like have to have scores. But it could also be 3 touchdowns to Amari Cooper and 1 rushing touchdown to Elliott, and the only person on the team that's worth having is Cooper because obviously he has 40 plus points. They still put up 35. Or it could be that CeeDee Lamb has 1 touchdown, but since he's 4,700, now the double stack's good. Now you want Prescott, Cooper, Lamb. So I look in terms of how do the pieces go together. And there are certain teams where if I stack the Chiefs, maybe the Chiefs stack is Mahomes, Kelsey, and that's it. And just Kelsey has 150 yards and 2 touchdowns, and CEH and Hill just don't make value based on that. That's why I look for those cheaper stacks because it's like, what players do I need to get 1 touchdown from? And what players do I need to get a touchdown and 100 yards from?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely like parameters that you need to kind of scale that probability by. So like price, I think, is a pretty easy one to just internalize with kind of the human eye. And like also we worked pretty simply, like are able to, consider the parameter of price. I think some of the more difficult ones that you're discussing is like concentration of team production. Off the top of my head, I have some ideas as to how we might do that, but it becomes kind of a complex puzzle to solve. But I do think, like, to me, the most quantifiable and easily accessible parameters that we might consider is pure likelihood of topping the slate, and then scaling that by relative cost of the stack. And, there's a couple different ways. I mean, you could define relative costs. You could look simply at like the quarterback and his top 2 receivers, or, the quarterback and kind of the average of top 4 receiver, but it does become hairy. So for the point of this exercise, I just looked at the cost of a stack, quarterback plus his top 2 receivers, as per DK pricing, scaled likelihood of topping the slate with points by price. And, then took a look and said, like, okay, here are the 13 teams we have. Here's how likely they are, per dollar to be the top scorer on the slate. And then here's how much they were owned in double stacks. And I thought it was interesting. I mean, you can go to the article and read it for kind of further detail or to see all 13 teams. But I mean, there are some interesting teams that stuck out as where ownership was in massive excess of the likelihood that team topped the slate per dollar. The teams that jumped out there were, Tampa Bay was the second most owned double stack, or a Tampa Bay double stack was the second most owned double stack on the slate.
So we're talking about, it would be what, Brady, Godwin, Evans?
So, I mean, I wasn't looking at, quarterback plus the top two receivers. I was just looking at quarterback plus any two receivers. So, perhaps maybe that high Tampa Bay ownership was because there was I would say Tampa Bay had kind of a wide mix of receivers that you could go with to pair with Brady. I mean, Godwin would probably be the cornerstone, but you could have gone, Evans if you thought he wasn't going to be, on any sort of snap count. You could have gone Miller. You could have gone Watson. You could have gone with a couple of the tight ends there. So, maybe that's why some inflation appeared for Tampa Bay. But Atlanta was a team that was the most owned double stack, about over, let's see, I'm looking at a graph, so I got to do these axes. But like over 10% of double stacks were Atlanta double stacks when, per dollar, we estimated them as being, about a 4% likelihood of scoring the most real points. To me, that seems like a inefficient and kind of over owned stack where you have, 10% of contestants that are double stacking going with Atlanta when, they only have a 4% chance of, topping the slate in terms of real points per dollar. I mean, I guess to me, you could make a case that Atlanta, they're so pass heavy when they're playing from behind that they don't need to be the top scoring team on the slate in terms of real points to be one of the top scoring fantasy stacks. And, if they actually do achieve kind of top real point total on the slate, that, their fantasy points would just be astronomical. But I thought that was an interesting, those were two teams that really jumped out as super high double stack ownership when per dollar, they didn't really have that high of a likelihood of being one of the top real football point scoring teams on the slate. Philadelphia was another team that had kind of really high double stack ownership, but not that high of probability of being top scoring team on the slate per dollar in terms of real football points. Some teams that stood out as having a pretty high relative likelihood of topping the slate in terms of real fantasy points or real football points per dollar that went largely under owned. Baltimore didn't go largely under owned, but the level of kind of double stack ownership lagged behind their top likelihood of being kind of the top scorer on the slate. San Francisco ownership was super low when they had, I would assume the second highest total on the slate. We had them projected as the second most likely team to lead the slate in real points scored per dollar. Their ownership for double stack was less than half of that. I thought that was a team we actually discussed a little bit on the show last week.
There's a lot of uncertainty with the 49ers because with their injuries and then Kittle getting injured and then them running the ball and having multiple running backs. It's one of those teams where people don't like stacking because there's no clear way to do it. So people tend to shy away from the uncertainty.
Yeah. The uncertainty that you kind of get access to by stacking them, I think potentially could be mitigated by the under ownership you have. I think that's kind of a trade-off that is difficult to navigate, purely quantitatively, but we'll see. Their total's pretty low this week and Kittle injured. So it's not, I do kind of wonder with this study, how transferable are the findings from the prior week to the future week? Okay, San Francisco's under owned last week, but now they're in a completely different game. They have a new set of kind of injury circumstances. Indianapolis was a team that had a pretty high total and went largely under owned from a double stack standpoint. But again, these are teams that are pretty run heavy. So I do kind of wonder if the reason we're not seeing super high double stack exposure on these seemingly high totals and seemingly likely teams to lead the slate is because there's fear that, if they achieve kind of this high total, they're going to run the ball a lot, which, I think is warranted with kind of double stack consideration. Like you're doing that to gain fantasy points through the air. But
I think those are good situations to have secondary correlations. So for instance, like I was talking about last week about the running back and opposing wide receiver, like in those situations where you don't expect either aerial attack to be highest scoring, but you still expect the game to be high scoring, where you have, like, for instance, I know we're going to come back to the Falcons-Cowboys game, but there's an instance in the range of outcomes where Zeke Elliott scores all the touchdowns, and where, like, the Cowboys march down the field and Zeke punches in 3 and 4 even, and Julio or Ridley or Gage or Hurst or someone on the other side, because the game is still going back and forth. It just so happens that Elliott, is catching balls out of the backfield. He has, 5 catches. He has 130 yards rushing and 3 touchdowns. And then you look and the receivers did okay. I mean, Amari Cooper is sitting there with 18 points and CeeDee Lamb's there with 12 points and Gallup has 14 points, but like it's unnecessary for the stack. But there's going to be, if the game's back and forth, it doesn't mean that Ryan plus Julio plus Ridley got there, but maybe one of them did. Maybe Julio had a 140-yard game. Maybe Ridley had 2 touchdowns, and you could pair it up that way in a lineup with another stack. So that's kind of where I look at those secondary correlations. Like for this week, like getting into the games, we have a lot of games. I mean, the highest total game is 54 with the Falcons Cowboys, and it's going to be the most owned game. But we have totals. We have games with close to 50 totals. It's not like we have a dearth of. We don't have we have good games that have totals that may be largely overlooked, at least from a stacking perspective. That when I say that I'm building 100 large field GPP lineups on Sunday, and I'm not going to have a single double stack of this game, that doesn't mean I'm not playing players in this game. It just means that I'm either having Dak with one of the receivers and not a double stack. I'm having Ryan with one of the receivers, not a double stack, or I'm just having they're one-offs. I'm having Elliott as a one-off, Cooper as a one-off, Gallup, Lamb, the Schultz, who knows? And then same for the Falcons side. But I think from a double stacking perspective, from a game stack perspective. So the game stack that's going to be popular this game would be something like on DK, Prescott, Cooper, Lamb, Julio, or Ridley. I think on the other end, it would be something like Ryan, Julio, Ridley, Zeke. Like that would be the other 3+1 on the other side. But in comparison to their odds, point per dollar, because you have to either pay up for a running back or pay up for a high-priced wide receiver like Julio. Like, there are other games that you can target where you could still grab a piece of the Falcons-Cowboys game. And I based on our current ownership on Thursday, like this game is wildly owned. I mean, like wildly owned. And there's like 3 other games that have nearly a 50 total.
Yeah, I mean, I have up just as of probably 10 minutes before the show started, I pushed updates, to our point projection tool, and it's kind of a distributional projection. So with that, you can identify kind of the probability of each team topping the slate. And the Cowboys are most likely to do so, but only at a 10.5% chance. Baltimore is 9.2% chance. They're not like that far behind. As you go further down, there are other teams that, maybe are 2-3% less likely to top the slate than Dallas, but like at the cost of extreme ownership, I think those are I think you're willing to trade, 4 percentage points in the, high total kind of probability for, 40 percentage points and kind of cumulative ownership of some of these middling stacks. So I think it'll be interesting, something to pay attention to this week. Dallas, obviously, huge total. You expect them to go big, but there are other, like you said, there are a number of actually really high implied teams this week that if you can get them at a fraction of ownership, fraction of cost, could be intriguing, ways to go. And then, like you said, get pieces of that game, but maybe not get all the pieces. I think could be an interesting.
Right. I like attacking. It's very similar to a strategy I do in NBA GPPs, is that I try to attack the games where the public perception is that the other team is not going to be able to hang in. So like in NBA, if a team is favored by 15 points, a lot of times, they go under-owned because they're going to be blowing them out. The starters aren't going to get their last rotation in. The player, if you try to stack it up, kind of take 2 players from one side and 1 player from the other side, it's like, well, the starter on the other side ends up not playing fourth quarter minutes either because they're being blown out. So the game goes under-owned. And I look at it as, well, who says they're going to win by 14 points? Maybe the crappy underdog team sticks around. They lose, but they still stick around. So I rarely stack this team because they tend to go over-owned. But I think this week, I'm looking at the Ravens-Texans game with a 50 total, and the spread's now up to 7. And I think the Lamar's going to be owned. He's always owned. So, I mean, you can have a lot of naked Lamar. You can have Lamar and Andrews, kind of like skinny stack type of thing, pieced together, and they blow him out or something. Yeah, but what happens if the Texans stay in this game? I think Marquise Brown is overpriced this week at 6,200. He's a very high variance player. I wasn't big on him last week for 5,100 to play in like cash games or something. But now that he's 100 less than Amari Cooper, who the hell is playing Marquise Brown? We have his ownership at like 7%. And if the Ravens do well and the Texans can hold on and play with these guys, Will Fuller's sitting there at 6,100 at 4% ownership. And with Hopkins gone, we saw that, basically Watson throws to him all the time. He's not doing 20-yard routes. He's doing like intermediate stuff. He's playing. Now I don't want to call him like Julian Edelman type, but he's allowing himself to find the spots in the zone and get chunk 8 to 10-yard plays. And in order for the Texans to stick around, I would think Fuller would have to have a good game, or David Johnson out of the backfield catching passes. And I look at the ownership of this game, and as a stack, as a 3+1, it's a 50 total. I think people are shying away from it because, yes, it has a higher probability because it's a 7-point spread that the Ravens just, it's 35-7 and they just run away with it. But I'm looking based on the ownership of, well, what happens if they don't? What happens if 50 points get scored in the game and it's 30-23? Like, someone on the Texans has gotten there.
Yeah. One thing, that does, so we just updated our correlation tool today, and I've been, especially ahead of this Thursday night game, been playing around with it a lot and kind of trying to get a feel for, how players match up. So, how they kind of mesh together and what players, shouldn't mesh together. So just backing up for a sec to that Dallas Atlanta game, I think if I'm trying to get out of stacking that game, but still want pieces to that game, would it make sense to try to find guys in that game that negatively correlate with other players in that game? So if I want a piece of Dallas, but don't want the whole thing, I want the one guy that's negative correlation with the other pieces, right? Because it gives them that individual player a higher likelihood of succeeding while others fail, right? That's what
right. It's natural leverage you're getting, especially in GPP. I'm going to assume on the Cowboys, it's Zeke.
Yeah. I mean, oh yeah. So I was looking at it now. I mean, you have, really good leverage between correlation between obviously Dak and his pass catchers. And I think, sorry, as I navigate tabs, all the pass catchers have good correlation with their opponent, right? So it's like if that game, if Cooper and Dak blow up, there's a decent chance because of correlation, there's kind of an elevated chance that the opposing team, Atlanta, also blows up. But Zeke has this negative correlation with some of the Dallas pass catchers, Gallup, Cooper. He has pretty much no correlation with Dak, slightly positive. Like that's a guy I think because of those correlation properties is a super interesting piece as kind of an island piece to that game without getting full kind of pieces of that game.
But, right, but he's also going to be. I mean, we're also talking about one of the highest owned running backs. It's not like you're gaining basically by playing Zeke by himself in GPP. You're not gaining leverage at the running back position because he's going to be owned, but you're gaining leverage over all of the Cowboys double stacks.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, sure. But anyways, to complete that thought, one thing I was looking at today was, how some of the top quarterbacks correlated with their opposing offenses, right? Like I think to me, a quarterback that is well suited for double stacks, not so much actually double stacks, but like stack plus bring back, the idea of running back a receiver on their opposition is a quarterback that correlates well with the cumulative scoring historically of the offense that opposes them. Lamar really hasn't been that guy for really his entire career. He doesn't like negatively correlate, but he really like has no correlation with the opposition.
Is a lot of that due to his rushing touchdowns?
To me, I actually think it might be more likely due to the strength of his. Just a hypothesis.
The strength of the defense that, like, no matter what he scores, the defense just doesn't give up enough points.
Yeah, and like I think when Lamar, and the Ravens boat race their opponent, that the Baltimore defense is really good. That when they can pin their ears back and really pressure the opposing team, like I really think. I mean, you see it like. In these games that Lamar has a huge game, right? The Ravens are winning by like 30 plus points at times. So
what you're saying, so with the less correlation, doesn't mean that it can't happen.
Right.
That it's more likely that, like, for instance, the stack that I was talking about, the 3+1 of Lamar, Brown, Andrews, Fuller, that in a case where Houston stays around, it's less, I'm not saying it's unlikely, but it becomes less likely that Lamar Jackson is the highest scoring quarterback.
No, I think it's kind of like the opposite. Like if Lamar is the high scoring quarterback,
no one on the other side of the team, no one does well.
Less likely that Houston stays around. But, if we want to build lineups conditional on, this scenario that you're describing, I think probably Lamar stands a perfectly good chance of being the highest scoring quarterback. It's just, the data would suggest that kind of probabilistically you're kind of fighting an uphill battle and hoping that Houston does stay around.
Okay. So, I mean, but then if you didn't want to attack that game with a stack and you take away Lamar, you could just play a secondary correlation of Brown plus Fuller or Andrews plus Fuller and go, well, in the case that Houston sticks around, Fuller does well, but Lamar does okay, but Andrews has 2 touchdowns. Like then, so you're not stacking, you're just doing a 1+1.
Yeah. And like, I think these correlation stuff, sometimes you can get yourself into looking at counterintuitive correlations where, on the Baltimore side, maybe like it says that Lamar shouldn't correlate well with the success of his opposing offense. But on the Houston side, like Watson does, so like, how, and then, what if like Lamar doesn't correlate well, but his receivers correlate well with success of the opposition? You do kind of get yourself into looking at when you're kind of triangulating correlation, you do kind of sometimes get yourself into this, I guess, tangled web of, contradictory correlations that, you kind of have to pick which side you believe to be, I don't know, like most salient. I think it's an interesting exercise. For me, I usually am trying to just like look at the different webs of correlation and see like, all right, which webs have the most agreement, where the pieces just kind of fit well on both sides. Houston, Baltimore seems to have like some pieces that suggest a fit, some pieces. And like, also, I'm not saying Lamar is negatively correlated with his opponent. It's just like it's like, I think like a plus like 0.05 or something like that. So it's just like a non-correlation. That means that, Houston as an offense is just as likely to kind of reach their upper 50% performance as they are to achieve their lower 50% performance. There are correlation instances that, have worse scenarios than that. I mean, take, Zeke and some of those Dallas receivers, right? Like that's a strong negative correlation where, you're like really fighting an uphill battle. I guess I said you're fighting an uphill battle in hopes that Houston offense produces in the midst of a Lamar breakout. It's not so much that you're fighting an uphill battle, but you're just not fighting like a down, you're not just like rolling.
Right.
Down.
I'm not going downhill. I'm not gaining anything. It's like I'm doing something a little bit just like neutral. It could happen. It's like I'm not gaining any advantage. No, I get it. But you have to agree that with the 50 total, that in comparison to the Falcons-Cowboys game, that the ownership difference is dramatic.
Oh, definitely. I mean, that's, I think, in kind of looping back to this, study I did of last week's Millionaire Maker. I think Baltimore was a team that got overlooked last week. And there was, they were the top total on the slate last week and still got overlooked. And now they're no longer the top total. And that, Dallas Atlanta game just has some really, really compelling pieces. Like Baltimore is, in the grand scheme of things, almost as likely as Dallas to, be the high score on the slate. I agree. The pricing on particularly Brown is a little discouraging, but still doesn't mean you can't, like you said, go skinny with like, I think Andrews is still at a pretty good price. Lamar is what he is. He's kind of going to be above 8, I think, until we see reason for it to be otherwise. Like, I think this is a game that probably will go overlooked. And
right. I readily admit that they're overpriced. But it's not a matter of they're overpriced, can't play him. It's they're overpriced. So I have to look at are they worth it for their ceiling at their ownership? And I don't mind, like some people call it paying up to be contrarian. Well, that's really what you're doing. Because if you told me Marquise Brown was going to be 14%, 18% on this slate at 6,200, I wouldn't be thinking about it. It's more the fact that, yes, he is obviously overpriced in the grand scheme of the slate with the Cowboys receivers and other receivers in that price range. So that lowers his ownership. The whole goal that, that we're trying to talk about for those that may be a first time listener, viewer, is that, we're attacking these large field GPPs. So like when you mentioned that, Lamar is not as correlated to the other side, it's like, well, both sides could do well, but is it going to do well enough to beat 400,000 people in a contest? So you're trying to get, like, if I could squeak out more positive correlation, like I'm looking to squeak out more positive. I'm looking to squeak out as much leverage and as much positive correlation as possible because I'm looking to win $1 million because, like, on DraftKings, like it was nice. It was nice seeing the teams back on the gridiron over the weekend, wasn't it? Wasn't it nice to see the teams back out on the gridiron, Stuart?
It was.
Lucky for us, that was just week 1. And there's no better place to get in on all of the action than with DraftKings, the leader in one-day fantasy sports, daily fantasy sports. One day. Yeah, it's one day. It's daily, right? To add to this week's excitement, DraftKings has millions of dollars in total prizes up for grabs. If you haven't tried DraftKings yet, which I don't know why you'd be listening to the show, maybe you're on a competitor's site. But if you haven't tried DraftKings yet, head to the App Store now. Like right now. Like, I'll wait for you. Go to the App Store now because you don't want to miss this. Draft your lineup now and feel the sweat like never before. Every run, pass, and catch means more with DraftKings. It's simple. I mean, we're talking about it. You just pick your lineup. Play whoever you want. As long as you stay under the salary cap and see how your team stacks up against the competition. We're talking about stacks. You want to stack your competitors. Nothing adds to the excitement of watching the game quite like having a shot at millions of dollars in prizes. DraftKings has paid out billions. That's with a B. Billions of dollars to winners since 2012, so they know a thing or two about cold hard cash. And I've won some of those GPPs, not in the millions, in the hundreds of thousands. So I know a thing or two about kind of like lukewarm cash. So download the DraftKings app now and use the code DFF. Okay, the code is DFF. For a limited time, new users can get a free shot at millions, or whatever, millions, like Austin Powers. Millions of dollars in prizes this week. Don't miss out on the week 2 action. Enter the code DFF to get a free shot at millions of dollars in prizes with your first deposit. Minimum $5 deposit required. Eligibility restrictions apply. See DraftKings.com for details. That's code DFF. Only at DraftKings. Make it rain. So we're trying to get these millions of dollars, Stuart. But we have we have higher total games. Look, Packers-Lions, 49.5. I know Devontae Adams is still going to be popular at 8,100 because of the Packers' kind of very condensed attack. But I mean, I've listened to plenty of shows like no one's talking about stacking this game. And if Galladay is out again, like with so many people that got burned with Marvin Jones last week,
ooh,
right? Doesn't it make sense? I mean, it's hard to calculate ownership because the ownership has Galladay factored in, but still like 13%. Okay, he's not like single digit ownership, but doesn't that make sense that if you stack this game, like you could skinny stack like Rodgers, Adams, Jones, or do something like Stafford, Jones, Adams, and like do you even need the double stack with the Lions with like a Hawkinson? It's a 49.5 total. The running games on both sides, it's teams that kind of, I think people think of Patricia as someone that wants to run first, but we've seen last year, like he'll let Stafford throw the ball. You kind of, based on the spread is 6 points, we expect the Lions to be behind. So like doesn't it make sense that at a 49.5 total, like people are talking about pieces and mostly Adams, but the stack of this game, like I'm hearing nothing about.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a strong total game. You figure competitive, right? It's actually one of these. Dallas, Atlanta is actually a pretty close spread, but yeah, I mean, this game figures to be close. To me, Adams feels like a building block, really either way you go. But there is, I think, some optionality in kind of how you work around, building around Adams, right? Like you could go Rodgers, Adams, but I think you could just as easily do Stafford and a Detroit pass catcher or multiple pass catchers and bring Adams back on the other side. I mean, I think, Green Bay proved last week that I think Lazard or MVS are viable, options. Be interesting to see if no Galladay, not sure, haven't really heard much buzz about him, but Quintus Cephas got 10 targets. He only caught 3 of them, but got 10 targets from Detroit last week. I think, we'll see if people kind of get scared away from Marvin Jones. There's really no way to know that until after lock. But, I think on the Detroit side, you could go Hawkinson. You could go Jones. I think Quintus Cephas is a deep, but, if no Galladay, viable option to bring back on the Green Bay stack. I wonder if like I feel like in PGA contests, sometimes you see like a ownership hangover on the winner the prior week. Like people will shy away from the winner because, and like, you know, Rogers got a price bump, sure, but like, you know,
it's kind of the I always make fun of this, Stuart. It's like the gambler's fallacy in the reverse, because you get some people in daily fantasy, and just same in like poker or any other type of thing like that, where you see it in PGA also in DFS, where like, oh, I can't play the last week's winner because the chances of them winning 2 weeks in a row are what I was like, well, you're not calculating. It's just same as, well, it came up red on the roulette wheel 6 times in a row, so I can't bet red. But then there's also people that are like, well, it came up 6 times in a row. It's a hot color. I got to bet red. So, I mean, you'll have people that are like, well, Rogers is back. He did well last week. I'm going to play Rogers Adams again. And then there are people that are like, well, he did it. What's the chances of Rogers having 2 good weeks? There's no way I play him.
I think just again, hypothesizing that it's like when you expected it to go red and it does, then you're like, oh, you know, I got like, it's definitely, you know, it's going to keep going red because like I saw that coming. You know, when the roulette wheel lands on Rogers and you didn't see it coming, you know, you're like, oh, well, that, you know, can't happen again. Like, you know,
right.
It's a fluke, right? Like I think the mind tends to assume that perceived flukes won't happen again, and perceived expected outcomes that do occur will continue to expectedly occur. You know, 2 years ago, I think a Rogers explosion game would probably fall in the expected outcome that did occur. But yeah, I mean, I think this is a super interesting game. We have Green Bay as, you know, 5th most likely to top the slate in terms of real points, about 2 and change percent less likely than like Dallas. And I mean, I just think, you know, aside from Adams, like this whole game is going to go so under-owned compared to some of those higher total games, you know, Baltimore, Dallas, Atlanta, Kansas City. Yeah, I think a pretty interesting spot. You know, one worth considering.
Go ahead. I think a similar type game is Vikings Colts. Currently is a 48.5 total. A lot of these totals have bumped up. Like the Lions Packers game opened at 46.5, and it's up to 49.5. So maybe that's why people haven't noticed that it's getting up there, the total. But the Vikings Colts game, we're going to see Jonathan Taylor be super running back chalk on this slate. Do you think from a you were talking about looking for plays that are negatively correlated to ownership? Don't you think that the under-owned side, where the Colts still put up, this game turns into a semi shootout, that the leverage would be to play Rivers, Campbell, Hilton with no Taylor, and that like basically Taylor and Hines kind of split work, no one gets there, and there's 3 touchdowns, 4 touchdowns through the air, and you run it back with Thielen. And yeah, Thielen's got a bump in price. I know Thielen is not like he got there last week in the 4th quarter. Like he's not a type of receiver that busts out for big plays, because I mean, he's just not that type. I don't know if people are going to have recency bias and go back to Thielen for ownership. I mean, I could look right here. Our current projected ownership on Thielen is, let me see. Thielen is 7.5%. But one of the things that I like doing, especially, I mean, I say this every week. I mean, it's the same type. It's always that psychological mindset of people think they know more than they know. I'm going to take advantage of the fact that, like, before the first week, it's like, well, what does anyone know? They think they know, and then half the stuff happens, and it isn't. But now we have we have 1 game sample. How much do you know in a 1 game sample? Who knows? Everyone's saying that T.Y. Hilton is no longer the number 1 receiver for the Colts because Paris Campbell got, 10 targets or something in the game where they had to come back? Well, who says that T.Y. Hilton isn't the number 1 receiver? He's under 6K. And if you're going to get some natural leverage negative correlation against chalk Jonathan Taylor. Even if you don't want to double stack, I mean, what's wrong with? And people are like, "Oh, Rivers just dumps off to his running back, right?" Like, that's the narrative now. Like, Rivers is going unowned practically. Hilton is going single digit owned. We'll get some Paris Campbell because he's cheap and some recency bias. But who says that? Maybe you play the 3+1 here, and to me, it's like natural leverage because, like, if Taylor's going to be 30+% owned, and the Colts still get there, and Taylor doesn't get there, that's going to be how it happens.
Yeah, it is. It's interesting. It's like week one, people super fearful of, I think, unknown kind of volume shares, whether it's their receiving core or on the ground. And then week two, maybe if that, I don't know that Indianapolis was a perceived unclear, volume share, but you do see like some of the kind of chips move, throughout the roster. And then it's like week two, it's like, oh, okay, well, what we saw week one will be exactly, the pecking order for the remainder of the season. I mean, I think T.Y. Hilton is an interesting leverage spot here. I don't know. My fear just with this game is that I do think both of these defenses are pretty decent defenses. And
we saw it last week. Vikings were horrible. But like I said, it's a 1-game sample size. What do we know?
Yeah, I mean, historically, I think they've been more so on Indianapolis' side than Minnesota. But I don't know. We'll see. I mean, I think Indianapolis was a team with a real solid total last week that went largely underowned relative to their price points. Perception being that they have a super strong offensive line and, 2 running backs that they're just going to ground and pound with. And, that kind of turned out not necessarily to be the case. Playing from behind against Jacksonville was a bit unexpected, but I think we kind of have to be willing to, detach from kind of what we thought coming in. And I don't know. It's an interesting spot. I think probably one that I might be inclined to stay away from, aside from I do think Hilton is interesting.
Right. The only reason I'm interested, if it wasn't for the fact that Jonathan Taylor was super chalk, I don't feel like I'm gaining enough. I don't necessarily love the stacks of this game, other than the fact that it's easy, natural leverage off. I mean, obviously the leverage would be the Colts only put up 14 points and no one in the game goes. I'm just going from the fact that if Taylor fails, but the Colts win, at their prices, that stack could work.
Yeah. I'd have to go back and look at, I don't have a great understanding off the top of how, Rivers or the Viking side kind of correlates with performance of the opposition. I mean, would a reasonable approach, you think, be to say, okay, well, I don't want, to fill up my roster with this game, but I do want, I think, like you said, that piece of leverage against Taylor is very compelling. I mean, is there a route where this game goes, as expected, pretty solid scoring game, but isn't, a slate breaking game? But, you say, all right, well, what if the game goes as expected and T.Y. Hilton takes 2 touchdowns away from Taylor, or Jack Doyle, catches two inside 10 touchdown catches, and, Taylor whiffs on the end zone, or, to me, I think that feels like the way I might want to consider this game, as opposed to filling it up with this game. But I agree. It's a compelling total and probably will go overlooked. I think one to kind of keep on the radar, but I probably won't be filling up on this game.
Would you describe that very similarly to the Tampa Bay Panthers game? Because that's a 48 total. The Bucs have a 28.75 implied total here. They're the biggest favorite on the slate. And I don't know if you've looked on Twitter or in the DFS community, no one wants to play Tom Brady, right? Godwin is in the concussion protocol. People seem to be off of Evans. no one trusts the running backs. But it's a 28, and I mean, like, I'm looking at this going, McCaffrey's probably overpriced, but like, I could play a DJ Moore. If he catches that touchdown at the end, he'd have 100 yards and a touchdown. We wouldn't be talking about, is he the number one receiver in Carolina? But like, when do we see the third? I think they're the third highest implied, the second. I mean, they're even above Baltimore currently.
Yeah,
and it seems like no one people are like, oh, maybe I could play Scotty Miller or something. Like, that's what people are talking about. Like, is there a path, especially if Godwin misses? Because we talked about before that the stack, if you're going to play Brady plus Godwin plus Evans, like that stack price is just, And Ronald Jones can catch passes out of the backfield. Like, to me, I'm looking at, like, with this total, just based on long-term correlation, why aren't I playing either Ronald Jones as a one-off?
Yeah.
And why aren't I playing at least a skinny stack of Brady Evans or something like that? They have the second highest implied total, and their ownership. I mean, I'm going to go look at their ownership now. I don't care about Brady's ownership because he's tied to the receivers, but Godwin, we currently have 2.8% ownership. But I mean, yes, he may miss. Evans 8%. Miller, I mean, he's not even calculated in yet. I mean, like, Ronald Jones is 5.8% currently. Like, this is like less ownership than the Baltimore Ravens, and we thought they were underowned. Am I just missing something? Is it just that people are off of the Buccaneers because of the perception of last week?
Yeah, I don't know. I'd be interested to know how ownership projections for Tampa Bay last week compared to the eventual ownership levels, because I mean, they were egregiously overowned last week, and I think I would expect a combination of ownership scaling back on them a bit, because of what happened last week. And then I think they do have like a way better matchup this week. So, I expect that to kind of level things out to the point. I don't know. I expect it to kind of get like at efficient level. Maybe though there is a chance that a combination of just, if kind of bullishness on Tampa Bay just plummets, and I think this is like an incredible matchup for them. They overachieve based on kind of what our perception of them was based on last week. I think there is a possibility that they get underowned. To me, though, I think Tampa Bay, at least going back to last year, they're a difficult team to double stack. I mean, Godwin and Evans just like have not shown an ability to go off in conjunction. It's kind of one or the other. So, I mean,
that's why I was talking before about, I'm more interested if Godwin is out.
Yeah.
And to me, if Godwin is in, I may have I may have a skinny stack. I may have a 1-1 or just pieces, or like the double stack is only good if we remove one of the expensive receivers, and I could play them with a Miller, a Howard, or a Jones, even with the running back, because now the stack price gets much cheaper. So yes, I agree with you that the correlation between Godwin and Evans has been shown to be very negatively correlated with one another, especially based on price.
Right. All right, cool. Yeah, I think we're in agreement there. I think Rojo is, to me, the at least most obvious, but maybe that will be obvious to far more people come Sunday. But I mean, God, Carolina last year was, I mean, you just wanted to go after them on the ground anytime you had an opportunity. We saw Jacobs just torch them last week, and
I think people are concerned that Fournette and McCoy are going to take work from him.
Yeah, I mean, look how though that worked out, and I'm doing exactly what you're kind of saying is we should avoid, but I mean, I think people were concerned about Mostert's workload last week, and
he was the alpha.
Yeah, and I don't have kind of Jones' market share of rushes in front of me, but I mean, God, it's just such a good matchup, and all it takes is one. I know he's not, a known kind of home run hitter, but To me, Carolina is a rush defense that I would want to bet against. To me, Jones seems like a good way to just gain simple, easy access to the high total without, spending huge on, Tampa Bay receiving.
I want to touch on two more games.
Sure.
One that I like and one that I may end up with no one from. But they're both 47 totals. The one that I don't want no one from, that I feel like I want no one from, is the Rams-Eagles game. 47 total. It's now flipped. Now the Rams are a 1.5-point favorite. Eagles opened as a 3-point favorite. It's now flipped. To me, I mean, I guess I could see myself playing Woods. I guess I could see myself playing Kupp. I'm unsure about the backfield against the Eagles' rushing defense because you got Brown, you got Akers, Henderson's going to be healthier. And then on the Eagles side, Sanders is going to be back, like Ertz and Goddard, and then Rager is healthy, and Deshaun Jackson's there. Like, it just seems like these teams just have so many pieces that, like, if this game goes off, like, I'm going to need 50 combinations in order to capture what the hell 3+1. Like, I could see maybe having a little bit of Woods, a little bit of Deshaun Jackson, but like, as far if I wanted to stack this game, I'd almost need to have 40. I need to commit so many more lineups because, like, oh, I got the right Eagle stack, but instead of Woods, it's Kupp that went off. Like, I don't want to get. It seems like a situation where either I'm taking pieces or I'm fading the stat. Like, it could get there, but I just who do I take?
Yeah, I mean, the Eagles are a weird team. Like, you look at their receiving core and there are a few players that stand out, but it is insanely crowded receiving core in that, it's just a bunch of like mid-level guys, and it makes it, I think, really not that interesting of a team to try to stack up. Because it's just like so crowded with kind of middling talent. I think, both these defenses are pretty decent. Philadelphia's got the offensive line woes that make, playing some of their offensive pieces a little concerning. I don't have too much on this game, but I think agree off the knee-jerk reaction is probably a spot to not get too invested in.
But the game that I do like that has a 47 total is the Cardinals-Redskins. Kyler Murray, probably going to be one of the chalkier quarterbacks. Kenyon Drake is going to get ownership at running back. Christian Kirk is going to get some ownership as a cheap wide receiver at 4,300. No one's talking about DeAndre Hopkins. It seems like we have a kind of chalky-ish piece, not full-fledged chalk like Falcons Raiders, like Falcons Cowboys, but like people are talking about, I'm going to play Murray, I'm going to play Kirk, I'll play a little Drake, but no one's talking about the stack. No one's talking about, well, why can't I play Murray with Kirk, with Hopkins, and then run it back with McLaurin? Like, no one don't know. Like, to me, that seems like the most in this game. If you told me, give me 3+1, like, I can name it. Like, that is it. Like, who else would you be playing? Like, those would be the four players. I think the combination of the four, Hopkins will still get ownership. We're projecting him somewhere in like 12% range. Kirk will probably get somewhere in the 8 to 10% range. Murray will get 10% or so, and McLaurin will get 10%. Like, none of these guys are like low owned, but the combination are people doing it. I'm not sure about that.
Yeah, I mean, Hopkins was a guy coming into this year that people just kind of the industry decided that, we're going to be low on Hopkins. And I mean, he came out and was huge week one. And
I think Stewart, that we're getting the reverse perception. We're getting reverse recency bias. Like the original perception you mentioned before, because of the way that the Cardinals played offense last year, that they just spread it wide. Like, you can't predict where the targets are going to go. And then in week one, You could just predict that DeAndre Hopkins is just going to get everything, and then people are just like, "Well, that was 1 week. It's not going to happen." Christian Kirk will get his, and Fitz will get his. Isabella will get some. Drake will catch passes out of the backfield. Well, who says that DeAndre Hopkins to Kyler Murray isn't the same DeAndre Hopkins that was to Watson? So many people are playing Julio. So many people are playing Devontae Adams, and sitting right between them in the salary structure is Hopkins. And the stack just makes it like, what other stack is? I mean, I'm not playing Steven Sims on the other side. I'm not going to go into Antonio Gibson again. I'm probably not going to play Drake with the stack. Like the tight ends don't matter. Maybe Logan Thomas. Okay, maybe I could run it back with Logan Thomas on the other side. But to me, this is the game that if I wanted to take 10 out of 100 lineups, it would be the same 4 players. And then I could rotate around there. And if the stack goes off, then I don't have to guess here. Right. And it's still with chalky. And it's not like I'm gaining a ton of leverage individually. But I think as a 4-man, it's going to be less than a 0.5% owned in a combination.
Yeah. I mean, I think it seems like a strong spot. And I mean, I think we could kind of be like stubborn in that, okay, we thought, Hopkins was going to come in and just be lost in the shuffle and continue to double down on that. It's interesting. I mean, because we've been talking about not trying to overreact to week 1. But it is, and I don't know that I have an answer. Maybe you can shed some light on kind of what you think the right approach is, but we don't want to overreact to week 1, but we also don't want to underreact to week 1 and, let kind of preconceived notions that were debunked with, granted, one piece of data, but, certainly one piece of Arizona data with DeAndre Hopkins was more than we've ever had. Why would we not, take a see in the one game that Hopkins has played with Murray, and you can look back at Murray's team last year and that they didn't really have any piece like DeAndre Hopkins. I don't know. I think it'd be somewhat silly to not at least take some notice on, what we saw and kind of the only piece of data we have.
Well, I mean, you mentioned the cognitive dissonance before with the expected versus the unexpected. Devontae Adams was super chalk last week at 7,300 because it's like, we expect Devontae Adams to get a large target share from Rodgers in that Packers offense. He got 40% of targets, which is higher than his normal, 31%. And now all of a sudden people are like, well, he's 8,100. I'm going to play him until he's 9,500 because I am expecting that to happen. And Hopkins started high priced. People didn't expect him to be worth it. And now it shows that he could be worth it. And people are just like, oh, well, no, since I didn't expect that, it can't happen again. It's the same type of psychological fallacy there. So compared to ownership, I rank in that top tier. I rank Hopkins number 1 compared to ownership. I rank Hopkins 1, Julio 2, and Adams 3. I think Adams is going to go over-owned. I mean, he's still a great play. I mean, great. I mean, he's still Devontae Adams. But he's going to be the highest owned wide receiver in that range. So I'm much more likely to, if I'm playing a chalkier lineup, I don't mind playing Hopkins as a one-off. I don't mind him. I could play him in a skinny stack with Murray. I could play McLaurin and Hopkins against each other in a non-stack secondary correlation and a 12% ownership. If you told me Hopkins has 12 catches for 140 yards and 2 touchdowns, we shouldn't be shocked.
Yeah, I mean, so yeah, I like, and that stack just makes a lot of sense from a correlation standpoint. So I just have it up here in front of me. I'm looking at it. Hopkins guys always correlated well with his quarterback, and I could see maybe some narrative where it's a running threat quarterback doesn't have ideal correlation with primary receiver, but in the 2 years when Hopkins was with Watson in Houston, plus 0.37 correlation, pretty strong. Murray correlation with the cumulative scoring of the opposing offense, plus 0.36, also quite strong. McLaurin on the other side, plus 0.34 correlation with opposing offenses. I mean, this is like, we talked about how with Baltimore and Houston, there are some contradictory pieces where, the Houston side correlates with their opponent well, but the Baltimore side doesn't. And it's kind of like, at that point, you kind of just got to decide what you believe. But like, this is a case where I think the pieces just all come together really nicely. Like Hopkins, great correlation with his quarterback, typically, historically. I know it's a new quarterback, but you would hope that some of those properties that lend itself to that correlation carry over. I do think Murray and Watson do similar things with their ability to, obviously make plays on their feet, both gaining points by rushing and also extending plays. And then you see just good cross-game correlation between the receiving pieces that we're discussing here. To me, this is a really good spot where, all the pieces that we're discussing kind of mesh together in a correlative net that, or web that, like, I think kind of is ideal, I guess, in what you're looking for. So, I think agree with you. Good spot.
Okay, so the rest of the games on the slate are 44 totals and below. So they are obviously significantly lower chance of being the top scoring team. Is there anything that you would either in those games that would disagree with that they have a low total, but obviously aren't going to be like towards the top of the list, but could maybe get there compared to ownership, or they're just pieces of each of these games? Because we're talking about games that are less likely to be targeted. So for instance, I think in the remaining games, the Jacksonville Titans game, you're going to see Henry, be popular. I think in the Jets San Francisco game, maybe you see some like cheap Herndon tight end. Bills, you may see some Bills Dolphins, you may see some Josh Allen kind of mixed in there. And then the Steelers Broncos, you may see some Melvin Gordon because Phillip Lindsay is injured. You may see some Deontay Johnson because he's a cheaper 4K type of wide receiver. But like to me, I'm looking at like the Giants-Bears game, and with tape back, like the Giants, like, do I want Saquon Barkley in a game where they only have an 18.25 implied total? Probably not. But I am looking on the other side. This may sound nuts. It may sound absolutely bonkers.
It's not going to, I think.
Okay. Jonathan Taylor is 5,700. He's going to be 30+% owned. I think we have him even higher. We currently have him projected as 36% owned. Okay. We go to the Colts. The total, the implied total and the spread is very correlative to running back performance, right? We know that. So the Colts have a 25.75 implied total. Okay? Jonathan Taylor, 36% owned. The Bears have a 23.75 implied total. So it's still lower. They're a 5.5-point favorite at home. 100 less from Jonathan Taylor is a guy that is going to be 2% owned. And his name is David Montgomery. Am I absolutely nuts to think that against a crappy Giants defense, that David Montgomery can't have a game where he has 20 carries for 100 yards and a touchdown?
No, I don't think
for the 2% ownership. I'm not saying in general. I know it's a lower percent chance, but to me, it doesn't sound nuts. If you just, the Bears have a total that you're playing running backs in similar. The Titans have a similar total. Like why wouldn't you play the running back on a team that's favored by 5.5 points at home that has a quarterback that the coach may not trust all that much?
Yeah, no, off the cuff, it doesn't sound that crazy. David Montgomery is a guy who I don't really frequently
Me neither. I know, Stu. I know it's crazy.
So the point being is, though, I'm just like not that familiar with kind of the ebbs and flows of his usage. I thought you were going to go down the whole Mitch Trubisky, Cohen, Miller, Robinson.
No, I'm not even talking about stacks. I don't want to stack this game. No.
God. I find myself talking myself into Mitch Trubisky plus Robinson and or Miller and or Cohen. I mean,
but who do you take on the other side?
I mean, there's no logic with trying to talk yourself into Mitch Trubisky stuff. It's not even worth like talking about on this show. It's a real problem that I gotta get a hold of. Let's see. I mean, yeah, Montgomery clearly kind of the lead back for Chicago last week, and yeah, I mean, to me that sounds reasonable. I don't have much of an opinion or take on it, but
it's it's a purely based salary, positional ownership, leverage. Montgomery rarely gets there. He gets hurt a lot. I mean, it's like I said, it sounds crazy, but if you took the names off, if I took Jonathan Taylor's name off or Montgomery's name off and showed you two guys that, based on if I looked at the blitz, Taylor has a median currently based on projections of 16, a floor of 7, and a ceiling of 26. So that's like the 25th to 75th percentile outcomes. So that's 16. If I look at Montgomery in the same model, his median is 12 and his floor is 4 and his ceiling's 21. So yeah, it's obviously lower. I mean, it's significantly enough lower. It's 4 points median lower, but we're talking about an ownership difference of 15 times at the same price. I mean, I don't even have to adjust for price. I mean, this is not a call. If this happens, if Montgomery does well, I didn't call this. I'm just using the math to go a guy at the same price and like, why can't I play? I mean, I could play Montgomery in a lineup where I'm playing chalky guy. I mean, like, just don't play Taylor in that lineup. And then boom, I could play that in single entry.
Yeah. No, off the cuff, I think it sounds reasonable. I think just looking at players priced around that point, I'd probably be more partial to a guy like.
I like Rojo better. I agree with you. I know you're going to say Rojo. I like Rojo better.
Yeah. But I guess Rojo probably has probably 2-3x ownership of Montgomery even as well. So no, off the cuff, I mean, yeah, I think it makes sense.
Why not play both?
That's true. Why not?
Right. So anything else before we get out of here? I mean, I know we didn't cover some of the quote crappier games, but I mean, you've shown through your analysis and the data that the higher total games are more likely to produce higher fantasy point totals. And for large, extra super large field GPPs, that's really the games that we should be targeting with stacks.
Yeah, I mean, I think going for these middling, if you want to be off some of the super high games, going for the middle of the pack games is more advantageous than going for some of these. I mean, some of these low teams like the Giants, less than 1% chance to lead the slate in total scoring. Like, that's just, I mean, maybe build one of your 150 lineups with the Giants if you want, but I mean, when you get down there, you're looking at some really minuscule probabilities. I think where probably the more strategic approach lies is, targeting some of these teams that are not within the top 3 or 4, but in kind of that next tier. Potentially a good way to go. And I think we did a good job of touching on some of those games. Green Bay, Tampa Bay, etc. So yeah.
Stuart, people could find you on Twitter at both the Advanced Sports Analytics Twitter as well as, you don't use your personal one that often.
Not really. I mean, I just use the ASA Twitter. We changed our handle this offseason. I think it's AS Analytics DFS.
So you don't even know.
Yeah. I'm not even going to say it on air, but our previous Twitter handle was so bad. I think
it was like Advanced Sports ADV or something like that.
Yeah, it is pretty bad. So we scoured the internet to try to find a better handle, but man, all the good ones have been snatched up. So
right, even Blenderhead has been snatched up. That's why I'm Blender HD on Twitter. You can find me there. And if you want to get $5 off a Core 4 premium subscription to RotoGrinders, click on the link in the description of this video, rotogrinders.com/media/ASA, $5 off your first month of RotoGrinders Core 4 Premium. That's NFL, NBA, MLB, PGA. You get all the content, the lineup HQ access, ownership projections, a ton of content, access to the premium Discord, which I am in. A lot of the analysts and the pros, we're in all the time. I'm in way more often than I should be in all the channels, sports-specific channels. So if you want access to me and all of the other pros at RotoGrinders, get your Core 4 premium subscription, $5 off. Click on the link. So for Stuart, I'm Jordan Cooper. This has been the Advanced Sports Analytics Show on RotoGrinders.com.